Please take a look at your Manishma handouts. They're available at the entrance of the sanctuary as well if you want to see what's going on at our shul in the next few weeks. There's a special visitor joining us, please God, next Shabbat, Friday night. Dr. Yitzhar Hess, who is the vice chairman of the World Zionist Organization. We're privileged to host him on Friday night, and he's just going to speak from the pulpit for a few minutes. If you would like to meet him and hear his thoughts on what's going on in Israel now, I encourage you to attend. This has been in Israel quite a difficult week. On Wednesday morning, Jerusalem was assaulted by twin terror attacks. For those who were not following, on Wednesday morning at 7 a.m., the first attack happened in Givat Shaul at the western entrance to the city. And the second attack took place several moments later near the Ramot intersection, which is one of the northern communities of downtown Jerusalem, facing downtown Jerusalem. One of the first unusual terms that I heard when I first visited Jerusalem many years ago was the term chefetz chashud. If you spend any time in Israel, you learn what a chefetz chashud is. It means suspicious object. We're in North America, we're not used to noticing a backpack that's unattended at an airport or a train station. But Israelis are taught to be very aware of unattended objects. They're called chefetz chashud. And because of a chefetz chashud, a whole street could be cordoned off for hours as the police wait for the bomb squad to come and investigate. Usually, the chefetz chashud is a backpack belonging to a stupid tourist. And the most fun part is to watch the tourist return to find their backpack blown up to smithereens when they return a few minutes later. But these attacks in Jerusalem show exactly why a chefetz chashud needs to be taken so seriously. These explosions came from bombs that were detonated remotely and stuffed into bags. The most cowardly kind of attack that you could imagine. Many of those caught up in the terror were children and teens on their way to school. At least 26 people were wounded, including several that remain in critical and serious condition, and the attack claimed the life of one Canadian victim, a 15-year-old yeshiva student named Aryeh Shupak, Hashem Yinkom Damo. A member of the yeshiva where Shupak studied said that he was waiting that morning for a ride to yeshiva at the bus stop at the entrance to the city. His shuttle was a few meters away from the explosion site where the boy was waiting for it. Aryeh was a sweet boy, a God-fearing boy, the man said. On this Shabbat, our prayers are with Aryeh and his family, for all those affected by these attacks, and for the residents of Jerusalem, Jewish and Arab, who are desperate for peace and security. May God grant all the injured of body and the injured in spirit a full and speedy recovery. Always at times like these, we should express gratitude for our friends. The Canadian government and Prime Minister Trudeau condemned the attacks swiftly and publicly, as did the United Nations, the European Union, and the United States. We thank them for their concern and their clarity. I am not as grateful for our Canadian media sources many of whom covered the attacks in a slanted way, hesitating and failing to clearly identify the nature and severity of these assaults. The National Post first called the incident a terror attack in quotation marks, removing them only after our Beth Tikvah's former head of communications, Ricky Firth, who now works for Honest Reporting, contacted them to complain and ask why those quotation marks were there. Thankfully, they removed them in Thursday's edition. The Globe's headline called the incident an explosion near a bus stop. And the same language scrolled the bottom of the news feed on CP24. Teen murdered in explosion near a bus stop in Jerusalem, as if this was some sort of accident. These creative media word games are designed to be purposefully obfuscating, and they are truly shameful. Woe to a people who does not know their right from their left, and who don't know the difference between good and evil, or an explosion and a terror attack, and who don't call terrorism, terrorism. In this new month of Kislev, the new Hebrew month of Kislev, the month of miracles, we should acknowledge the many miracles that occurred during the attack and its aftermath as well. The number of casualties could have been much, much higher. These bombs were not small explosions. They were massive. And there were two of them. And they occurred during the morning rush hour in very high-trafficked areas. The bombs that were detonated were packed with nails and other shrapnel, which means sometimes a nail flying 1 inch higher or lower can make all the difference. There was an 18-year-old girl who was hit with a nail on her ear. Imagine if it was 1 inch off. And there was a story I read of a yeshiva bacher, another one of the victims, whose hat protected him from the flying shrapnel. Should all wear hats. And just 24 hours after the bombings, the Shin Bet, Israeli security, thwarted a bus bombing attempt that could have resulted in dozens of casualties, orchestrated by a resident of Gaza who had a work permit to enter Israel. There were many miracles that occurred that morning, and we should thank God that more people were not killed. From common people to the highest levels of government, the Jewish people in Israel remain resilient and strong. Ein ke'amcha Yisrael, we say. There's no people like the Jewish people. Jewish volunteers were seen on the streets of Jerusalem Wednesday morning, providing water to people who were stuck in traffic because of all of the street closures. Contrast this with the response of the Palestinians, who were handing out candy in that same traffic to celebrate the fact that they killed a Jew. In Qatar and Doha, where millions are gathered for the World Cup, there were reports of fans celebrating this act of terrorism and harassing Israeli journalists. So the Jewish people in Israel are strong and resilient, but they're not naive. They understand that these attacks had nothing to do with occupation, nothing to do with a state, and nothing to do with apartheid. Arab terror and attacks occurred before 1948 and before 1967, and they will not stop. They are caused and motivated by anti-Semites who hate the Jewish people and want them dead. These attacks take expertise, training, weapons, and planning. They are expensive and take funding and support. Funding and support generously provided by aid money coming to Palestine, by Iran, the biggest supporter of terrorism in the world today, and even by Qatar, among others. The world chooses to look away while dirty dollars reward terrorism and foment it in the Middle East. There has been tremendous controversy in the past few weeks over the results of the recent Israeli election. We know that Israelis re-elected, after a hiatus, Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu from the right, and that in order to form his government, he will need participation from racist extremists Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. Americans are not happy. Tom Friedman, in a recent New York Times op-ed, said, "The Israel we know is gone." Even the conservative movement, which is usually silent and should have stayed silent on Israeli politics, issued a statement warning of the dangers of including Ben-Gvir and Smotrich in top cabinet positions. I am no fan of these guys, and I'm guessing you all feel the same way, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. But this attack is a reminder of why they were elected. And it was not because they represent the mentality or the persona of the average Israeli. Try to get into the head for a moment of a parent of one of those kids who was waiting at the bus stop in Jerusalem Wednesday morning. What would you be feeling right now? Who would you vote for? What would you be thinking and saying? It turns out that we do have the thoughts of one such parent. Rabbi Uri Pilakowski made Aliyah from New Jersey 6 years ago. He's a frequent Jerusalem Post contributor and works for Nefesh B'Nefesh, helping people make Aliyah. His 18-year-old daughter Naomi was walking to her regular bus stop commute in Jerusalem on Wednesday. The bomb detonated as she approached the stop, and she was injured in the attack. This is what Rabbi Pilakowski said in the hours following. Quote, "There are people who planned this attack. They scouted the bus stop for days. They saw my daughter waiting every day and aimed to kill her. These people are celebrating tonight. I might sound harsh. I don't care. I want them dead, not tried, not jailed, executed, ASAP." End quote. Now you can say that Rabbi Pilakowski was caught up in the heat of the moment, but I have met Rabbi Pilakowski before, and he communicates clearly and sincerely. I would think that today, next month, next year, he would say the same words. And I'm not sure that any of us would feel or say anything different if, God forbid, one of our children was in the same place at the same time as Naomi. The problem with many Jews in the diaspora, the reason many of us have been outspoken in condemning the results of the most recent election, is that many of us want Israel to be something Israel itself does not want to be. In the words of Daniel Gordis, American Jews want Israel to be successful but humble. They wanted to be strong and secure, but still desperate for foreign support of all sorts. They wanted to be Jewish, but in a nice kind of way. They want Israeli dancing, which I haven't seen here in years, flags at the right time, a country filled with Tikvah moments, as some call them, a country traditional enough to be heartwarming, but not so traditional that it would dare imply that less intense forms of Jewish life cannot make it. A country steeped in memory, but also one that is finally willing to move on. Well, that may be what many of us in the diaspora want Israel to be. But I agree with Dr. Gordis. It is not what Israelis themselves want Israel to be, and it never was. Tom Friedman is wrong. Israel has not changed at all. It continues to insist and be willing to sacrifice for one thing more than anything else, and it is not an egalitarian kotel. It is security, security, security. If we lived there, we would also be fed up with terror attacks in Jerusalem, fed up with pogroms in Lod, fed up with Arab parties in the Knesset that endorse terrorism, fed up with Bedouins taking control of the Negev, fed up with Gazans exploiting their work permits to kill people, fed up with tunnels, fed up with Katyusha rockets and bomb shelters, etc., etc. Israelis narrowly elected the right, not because they like those leaders, but because when it is your daughter waiting for the bus in the streets of Jerusalem, all you care about is her getting to her destination safely. All you care about is her getting to her destination safely, full stop. So with all due respect to those who have sounded alarms about this recent election, have some perspective, have some compassion. Israelis are not racist apartheid mongers who want Palestinians to remain suffering and impoverished. They want security. It is not hard to understand if you can just put yourself in the mind of an Israeli citizen, inside the minds of our brothers and sisters who just have had enough of living in a sea of violence. In a jarring coincidence, this week's Parsha presents a fight between Isaac's shepherds and the shepherds of Gerar regarding wells and control in the land of Canaan. Even when the land of Israel is promised to Abraham and his descendants, those same descendants need to fight in order to gain their rights in the Holy Land. And Isaac is fulfilling that duty, strengthening the roots and growing the seeds of continuity that were planted by his father. Rabbi David Sabato notes that Isaac is different from his father and his son in that he exhibits the quality of perseverance. He is a man of the earth, and even though the shepherds of Gerar fight him, and he has no interest in fighting, he still does not give up. In that sense, the citizens of Israel today are students of Isaac, our forefather, continuing on his path, committing unfailingly to his ideals, understanding fully that the Jewish people must battle and struggle and sacrifice in order to earn the land of Israel. Of that there is no doubt. The question is whether we in the diaspora are committed to those same ideals, are prepared for it to get messy, and are willing to fight to become students of Isaac, our forefather, as well, to claim our right. The Talmud quotes Rabbi Chia saying, "Thus is the redemption of Israel, kim'ah, kim'ah." It happens little by little. You don't get to your destination quickly. Redemption is slow and complex, with stumbling blocks like those we experienced this past week along the way. May our resilience and solidarity as a nation only increase in the face of these attacks, even if the whole world is attempting to discredit us. We are the descendants of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, and we will stubbornly and eternally insist on our place in the world as a nation deserving of independence, sovereignty, and freedom. Shabbat Shalom.